Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. You know those news stories that kind of hit you like a ton of bricks, but then everyday life just sort of takes over?
Yeah,
Well, that's why we're here today. We're going beyond just seeing headlines about that really powerful earthquake that hit Myanmar. We want to understand what actually happened, what made the whole region shake, and what it means for, for understanding our planet. It's always on the move.
it is.
You gave us some really fascinating articles and analyses to look at, so let's unpack those for our listeners and get into the good stuff.
Absolutely. And I think when we look at those initial reports, that magnitude 7.7 earthquake, that right away tells you this was a massively powerful event. I mean,
Wow.
think about those action movie scenes with all the shaking and chaos.
Oh, yeah.
That's not really that far off at this scale. Our sources highlight the epicenter was near Mandalay, a city rich with history. And the early reports unfortunately show over 100 lives lost. It's a really harsh reminder that these aren't just abstract geological events. They have very real and tragic human cost.
Okay, magnitude 7.7, we hear that number, but what does that really mean in terms of impact? Like, are we talking things falling off shelves, or is it something that actually changes the landscape?
Think of it less like a dropped vase and more like a wrecking ball hitting a building. A 7.7 magnitude earthquake releases a truly massive amount of energy, capable of causing really widespread and severe damage. And the reports we've got paint a pretty clear picture. Buildings collapsing in Mandalay, even historical sites like the Royal Palace suffering significant damage, and the collapse of the Ava Bridge, which of course creates huge logistical problems for the region.
Wow.
We're even seeing reports of shaking and damage as far away as the more modern capitals Naypyidaw and Yangon,
Yeah.
which really highlights just how far the reach of this quake was.
It's kind of hard to even picture that kind of force. And it wasn't limited to Myanmar, right? It spread outwards, a pretty significant distance.
Yeah,
I remember one of the articles you sent mentioned impacts in Thailand, even as far as India.
exactly. The energy released from a quake of this size, it doesn't just stop at a border. We saw some concerning reports coming out of Bangkok, Thailand, where a high-rise building that was still under construction apparently gave way, trapping and tragically killing workers. And then to see tremors felt hundreds, even thousands of miles away in places like Cambodia and India, it really emphasizes the sheer scale of those seismic waves generated by this event.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. So what makes Myanmar such a hot spot for this kind of intense seismic activity? It's not exactly on the same fault line as, say, California, which everyone always hears about.
That's a really good point. While California's San Andreas Fault is definitely iconic, Myanmar actually sits at a very similar critical geological crossroads. It's positioned right where the massive India plate is colliding with the equally huge Eurasia plate. And we're not talking gentle bumps here. It's this constant immense pressure. And specifically in Myanmar's case, that boundary between these plates is dominated by what's known as the Sagaing Fault.
The Sugain Fault, it sounds almost like something out of a fantasy novel, but geologically speaking, what's special about it,
Right.
our sources described it as this incredibly long, straight feature.
Right. And that linear nature is actually crucial. The Sagaing Fault stretches for about 1,200 kilometers, slicing north to south, right through some very densely populated areas. And experts at the USGS, they've pinpointed this earthquake as a result of strike-slip faulting along this fault. Imagine two colossal blocks of earth just grinding past each other horizontally. That friction builds up over time, and when it finally releases, you get an earthquake.
So it's like this immense slow motion tug of war happening beneath your feet, and this earthquake was like the rope finally snapping.
Yeah.
One of those articles you sent actually compared the Sagaing Fault directly to the San Andreas Fault, and that really made it click for me.
It's a very insightful comparison, and Dr. Rebecca Bell, a leading expert in tectonics, she highlighted those similarities, specifically noting that the straight geometry of both faults allows for very long ruptures. And as she pointed out, the longer the section of the fault that slips, the more powerful that resulting earthquake will be.
Makes sense.
And the devastating 1994 Northridge earthquake in California, although it wasn't on the main San Andreas Fault, it was still part of that larger system. And that serves as a pretty chilling reminder of the potential for damage in those strike-slip environments.
Wow, that really puts that 7.7 magnitude into perspective. It's not just a number. It represents this huge release of pent-up geological stress right on par with some of California's most significant seismic events.
Exactly.
Now, our information also mentioned the depth of this earthquake. They said it was relatively shallow. Why does that matter?
The depth is a super critical factor in how destructive an earthquake can be. This particular one occurred at a shallow depth of only about 10 kilometers, which is roughly 6 miles. Think of it like this. If the energy release is closer to the surface, there's less rock and earth to absorb and dissipate those seismic waves before they hit population centers.
Okay.
And as Dr. Ian Watkinson explained, shallow earthquakes tend to deliver their energy with a much more direct and intense force at the surface, leading to greater damage.
It's like a punch that lands with more force if it doesn't have to travel through layers of padding to get there.
Right, exactly.
One thing that's really concerning from the material you shared is the vulnerability of the infrastructure in that region, it sounds like. Building codes and construction practices might not be as robust as in places that regularly deal with this kind of seismic activity.
That's a hugely important point to consider. While earthquake-prone regions like California and Japan have invested a lot in developing and enforcing really stringent building codes designed to withstand major predams, shaking the situation in Myanmar and surrounding areas can be quite different. Rapid urbanization in Myanmar has led to a surge in construction of high-rise buildings made with reinforced concrete.
Right.
However, if these structures haven't been built to those rigorous earthquake-resistant standards, they become incredibly vulnerable during a significant seismic event. And the tragic consequences that we saw in the 2023 earthquake in Turkey, where so many poorly constructed buildings collapsed en masse, it really serves as a stark warning.
Yeah, it's a sobering thought that it's not just the power of nature, but also our preparedness or lack thereof that dictates the scale of the disaster. Our sources indicate that the USGS estimates a truly staggering number, around 800,000 people in Myanmar alone may have experienced that most violent shaking. That's a huge number, and sadly, the expectation is that the initial death toll could rise significantly as rescue efforts continue, and the full extent of the damage becomes clear.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate reality in the immediate aftermath. The focus right now has to be on getting aid to those affected, searching for survivors, and beginning to assess those long-term needs of these communities. It's a complex and challenging situation for sure.
It really drives home the raw power of our planet and how vulnerable we are. If you're finding this deep dive into the science and the impact of this earthquake, insightful, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us bring you more of these in-depth explorations.
Absolutely. Understanding the geological forces at play, the magnitude and depth of an earthquake, and the critical role of infrastructure, those are all vital pieces of the puzzle. When we try to understand the impact of such events, by connecting those dots, we gain a much clearer understanding of the challenges those affected regions face.
This recent earthquake in Myanmar, it's so much more than just a fleeting news story. It's a powerful reminder of those incredible dynamic forces constantly reshaping our world and the vulnerabilities of communities in those seismically active zones. The comparison to the San Andreas Fault really underscores the potential for widespread devastation when these geological titans unleash their power.
Definitely. And I think when we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, it raises some important questions for all of us. How can we as a global community better support regions that are especially susceptible to these kinds of natural disasters? And how can we ensure that infrastructure development around the world prioritizes safety and resilience in the face of such powerful forces?
Those are some crucial questions to consider. What does this deep dive into the Myanmar earthquake make you wonder about? Maybe it sparks an interest in the long history of earthquakes in Southeast Asia, or perhaps you're curious about the advancements in earthquake-resistant building technologies. We definitely encourage you to keep digging into these fascinating areas.
There's so much to learn out there, from the geological records of past seismic events in the region to the incredible engineering innovations being developed to mitigate earthquake damage. It's a field where our understanding is constantly evolving.
Absolutely. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and giving you a deeper understanding of the forces at play in Myanmar, be sure to like and subscribe for more explorations into the events that shape our world.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for diving deep with us, and remember to keep those questions coming.